Hi, very good morning. I'm Dr. Janak Patel, MD General Physician. I'm not a neurologist. This particular video lectures are for educative purpose. Today we are going to discuss regarding one of the common disorders in neurology which you see very frequently in your everyday practice, but it is under recognized or misdiagnosed. So you must be aware of this condition, and if you are aware of this condition you will be able to pick up those cases and you will make an early diagnosis. Very frequently you will see this group of people in your family member also, and you will see in your everyday practice. Today we are going to discuss regarding a normal pressure hydrocephalus. Meaning is very simple. Person is having dilated ventricles. In spite of dilated ventricles, the intracranial pressure is normal, and that's why it is labeled as normal pressure hydrocephalus. A good number of cases of NPH is also labeled as idiopathic normal pressure hydrocephalus, where you are not able to identify the exact etiology. Then it is called as INPH, or we call idiopathic normal pressure hydrocephalus. So by definition, it is a clinical triad which is characterized by abnormal gait, urinary incontinence, and dementia with dilated ventricles and intracranial pressure being normal. You will label that person as normal pressure hydrocephalus. So there is also another word which are being utilized, three W's. It is called wobbly, that is ataxic gait or abnormal gait, or it is also called as a short shuffling gait. Urinary incontinence is called as a weight, and dementia is called waking. There are another word which is being utilized is gait impairment, cognitive impairment. Cognitive impairment is dementia, and urinary incontinence is called overactive bladder. So if you go in little more detail, as far as abnormal gait is concerned, it is bradykinetic, broad base. It is also described as magnetic or short shuffling gait. Urinary incontinence is having increased urinary frequency, urgency, or frank incontinence. And dementia consists of memory impairment, disorientation, there is a memory loss, bradyphrenia, forgetfulness, decreased attention, and inertia. And invariably it leads to worsening of social or occupational function, and there is a decline from a previous higher level. This is the characteristics of what we call as a dementia or cognitive impairment. When we label a person is having probable idiopathic NPH, so it is called diagnostic criteria. In history, if you get insidious onset, age over 40, symptom duration is lasting for 3 to 6 months, there is no etiology or known cause for secondary NPH. This is gradually progressive over a period of time. There is no other medical, psychiatric, or neurological condition that could cause this group of symptoms. That is we call triad. this is on clinical grounds, or we call history. And when we go for brain imaging, so on brain imaging, if there is a ventricular enlargement which is not attributed to cerebral atrophy or cognitive dysfunction or congenital disorders, there is no macroscopic obstruction present, and at least any one of these following four are present, that is enlargement of lateral horns not attributable to hippocampal atrophy, callosal angle is greater or equal to 40 degree, there is an evidence of altered brain water content on imaging which is not attributable to ischemia or demyelination, and aqueductal or fourth ventricle flow void on MRI. Out of these four, any one is present. So if these are present, we label that as probable idiopathic NPH. As far as radio imaging is concerned, there is one criteria on MRI or CT we call as the Evans index, where you get a finding any one or more of the following, that is temporal horn enlargement, periventricular signal changes, periventricular edema, and there is a flow void at aqueductal or fourth ventricle, and Evans score or Evans index at least 0.3, and that Evans index can be calculated by, or you call Evans ratio. So it is a ratio between maximum width at anterior horn, this is the maximum width at anterior horn of lateral ventricle, to the maximum width of calvarium, this is calvarium, maximum width. So when you take a ratio of those two, it should be greater than or equal to 0.3, and then we call that as ventriculomegaly. So for identifying ventriculomegaly, this is the criteria what is being utilized, and if any one of this or more than one, if it is present, it establishes that there is definitely hydrocephalus. And along with that, if you get three criterias, that is dementia, urinary incontinence, and gait disturbance, you label that as NPH. As far as etiology is concerned, 50% of the time it is idiopathic, and that is labeled as INPH. And as far as the secondary groups is concerned, subarachnoid accounts for almost 23% of the group. Meningitis accounts for 4.5% of the group, and traumatic brain injury accounts for almost 12.5%. Secondary NPH will give a better response by shunting. So shunt gives much better response than idiopathic variety. Now 50% of the idiopathic cases, in that there is a leading theory which is called impairment of the CSF outflow. And in an intraventricular pressure studies, it shows you B waves present. And there is also two terms which are being utilized, adult hydrocephalus syndrome or adult symptomatic hydrocephalus. This is as far as idiopathic variety is concerned. There are some group of conditions where you come across reversible causes of dementia, and it is important to diagnose because we can treat them, and 5% of normal pressure hydrocephalus, in a normal pressure hydrocephalus, 5% of all dementia cases will have half of the treatable causes, means indirectly 5% of all dementia invariably suffers from normal pressure hydrocephalus and they are treatable. And other causes of dementia which are treatable are thyroid disorders, particularly hypothyroidism, B12 deficiency, depression, side effects of pain medication, sedatives, sleeping pills, etc. Inflammatory disorders like lupus or infections like Lyme's or HIV or hepatitis, and occasionally by tumors or subdural hematomas. All these causes are treatable. There are some of the causes of dementia which are not treatable or they don't give good results are Alzheimer, multi-infarct dementia, Parkinson disorders. These are not reversible. And unfortunately, non-reversible dementia accounts for almost 90% of the patient. So it is very important to find out such cases like normal pressure hydrocephalus where dementia is reversible. So you can see this particular group, that is reversible group. Alzheimer accounts for almost 70% of the dementia group. Vascular dementia is 15%, frontotemporal Lewy bodies is 12%, Parkinson is 4%, and these are miscellaneous group. This is a very big group, and in this particular group, you will be accounting for nearly what we can say that they are not reversible. Not reversible. As far as epidemiology is concerned, elderly individual, it is commonly seen in those particular group, more than 65. Prevalence of NPH in that group is 1.4%. There is no particular race or gender predisposition. More than 60% of the patient with NPH had cerebrovascular disease. More than 75% had Alzheimer's disease at the time of the shunt surgery. As far as the pathophysiology is concerned, there is a ventricular enlargement which is leading to periventricular ischemia, compression and stretching of the arterioles and venules, arterial hypertension and cerebral arteriosclerosis increases in NPH. If you look at the CSF dynamics, the CSF formation in NPH is reduced, volume is increased, it is almost double, and turnover rate is also reduced. And this is because of decrease in the CSF flow. Ideally, the mechanism is very poorly understood. It is a variety of a communicating hydrocephalus. There is a resistance to CSF flow that leads to raised intracranial pressure at night. There is a stretching of ventricular wall and there is an enlargement of ventricle. So normal flow between ventricle and subarachnoid space, and probably there is a defective absorption, maybe little overproduction of CSF, but good number of time there is a decreased production of CSF. As far as secondary groups is concerned, intracranial hemorrhage, meningitis, brain tumor, venous thrombosis can result into increased production of CSF and decreased absorption of CSF. If we go to the clinical picture, we have already told you three classical: dementia, urinary incontinence, and gait disturbance. And on radio imaging, Evans index, that is ratio of frontal horn to maximum width of calvarium, is more than 0.3. Classical triad, if you go into the detail regarding gait disturbances, it is very, very typical. And no classical gait disturbances may be seen in some of the group. And when it is seen, it is a wide base shuffling gait. It is also described as magnetic because person does not raise the foot from the ground and there is a difficulty in initiating the walking. Difficulty with walking motion resolves with minimal support of the patient or lying down patient down, and it resembles classical like Parkinson gaits. There is hyperreflexia. Apraxia of the gait, there is no weakness or ataxia. Typical magnetic gait has been described: wide base, tiny space steps, shuffling with minimal clearance, as if the foot are stuck to the ground. That's why it is called as a magnetic gait. So it is almost like a magnet is stuck and person finds difficulty in lifting up foot from the ground. Urinary incontinence, it is the true incontinence. There is urgency. Due to stretching of the periventricular nerves, there is a loss of detrusal inhibition. Bladder sphincter muscles are unaffected. This is the characteristics of urinary incontinence. Dementia is usually mild. As soon as the shunt is being done, it is giving a good response. Dementia will last. Dementia is usually less responsive of the symptoms to intervention. So, shunt surgery may give a little response or almost no response to dementia. Mental status changes may be resembling almost like depression. There is a prominent memory loss. There is a bradyphrenia. The person will have a forgetfulness, decreased attention, aphasia sometime. You can have agnosia. Almost it is good number of time diagnosed as Alzheimer. We already told you probable idiopathic NPH diagnosis, that is gait disturbances, decrease in step heights, decrease in step lengths, decrease in speed, decreased trunk sway, wide stance, toe turn outwards while walking. The person will have an end block turning, turns takes 3 or more steps, impair balance. All this may be found as far as gait disturbances is concerned. As far as the cognitive disturbances is concerned, psychomotor slowing, decrease in fine motor speeds, motor accuracy, difficulty in dividing or maintaining the attention, impairment in recall, especially for recent events. There is an impairment in executive functions like multi-step procedures, working memory, formulation, abstraction, insight, etc. And there may be behavior or personality changes. In urinary symptoms, incontinence, persistent urinary incontinence, or maybe there may be fecal plus urinary incontinence with urgency, frequency, and nocturia. So when this particular three triad is present, it is put into a group we call as a probable idiopathic NPH. And as far as the intracranial pressure is concerned, we call it, if the opening pressure is between 72 to 40, that is also in favor of probable. And when you want to use a possible, history is very important. We have already given before that subacute onset, early age, lasting for more than 3 to 6 months, may follow trauma, subarachnoid hemorrhage or meningitis. Symptoms are not entirely explained by coexisting neurological condition, non-progressive or not clearly progressive. And brain imaging, we have already shown you that ventricular enlargement associated with cerebral atrophy of sufficient severity to explain the ventricular enlargement, structural lesion that may increase ventricular size, clinically incontinence or cognitive impairment in absence of the gait or balance dysfunction, gait disturbances or dementia alone, either gait disturbances or dementia alone, and opening pressure is unavailable or outside the range of probable NPH. Then we label that as possible idiopathic NPH. Unlikely if on a radiology there is no ventriculomegaly, means Ivan index is not in favor of ventriculomegaly. There is sign of increased intracranial pressure such as papilledema. Person does not have a classical clinical triad, that is urinary incontinence, gait disturbances and dementia. And symptoms can be explained by other etiology, as for example say like spinal stenosis, etc. You will say that it is unlikely to be idiopathic NPH. This is a mild difference between Alzheimer and NPH. In Alzheimer, you will have an impairment in memory, learning, orientation, attention, executive function, writing, etc. While NPH, psychomotor slowing, fine motor speed will be slow, fine motor accuracy will be slow. This will be borderline impair. What are borderline impair? Motor and psychomotor skill, visual spatial skill, language and reading. While here there is a borderline impairment of auditory, memory, attention, executive function, behavior, personality changes, etc. Normal pressure hydrocephalus is usually seen in an adult. It is a type of communicating hydrocephalus, very frequently associated with head injury and meningitis. There is a gradual accumulation of CSF which causes the ventricular dilatation. Secondary to that ventricular dilatation, person has got dementia, magnetic gait and urinary incontinence, classical triad. So gait disturbances, dementia and urinary incontinence is a classical triad. And when you do a ventriculoperitoneal shunt, person may improve the symptoms. Normal or slightly elevated CSF pressure may be there. Lumbar puncture with removal of small quantity of fluids helps, which will confirm the diagnosis. Brain imaging shows ventricular enlargement without cortical atrophy. It is more in favor of NPH. Mainly you will have to differentiate from Parkinsonism, where you will have a hypokinesia, freezing, imbalance and extrapyramidal symptoms. These extrapyramidal symptoms are not seen in case of NPH, and you don't see a freezing in NPH. Best way to differentiate is a trial of levodopa. As soon as you start a levodopa, it will help more in case of what we call as a Parkinson disorders rather than NPH. So it gives good results in Parkinson's, and there will be no benefit in case of NPH. So for making a diagnosis of NPH, you have to suspect clinically. If any person who comes to you with a classical triad, that is dementia, gait disturbances and urinary incontinence, you must go for a good history, that is gait disturbance, urinary incontinence, and dementia. And deterioration can be more and rapid. Gait instability is pronounced. Now you go for an MRI by which you try to confirm as far as Ivan index is concerned, ventriculomegaly is concerned, and rule out cortical atrophy, which is not common in case of NPH. By doing a high volume lumbar puncture, or what we call as a spinal taps, person is benefited. Person is benefited. And if a person is benefited, it is again in favor of NPH. B12 level are being done to rule out nutritional deficiency producing dementia. Thyroid profile should be done to rule out hypothyroidism, which can be also associated with little amount of cognitive function deterioration. CSF analysis to rule out meningitis. Opening pressure studies are being done, and if it is slightly higher than normal, it is in favor of NPH. And on studies, transient elevation of pressure with B waves may be detected, and in a CSF, protein lipocalinin, prostaglandins D are marker of frontal lobe dysfunction in idiopathic normal pressure hydrocephalus, and these are decreased due to damage to arachnoid cells. CSF tapping of 45 to 50 ml removal. If CSF pressure may be transiently elevated and you remove 40 to 50 ml, the improvement may be delayed. It may appear after 1 or 2 days, but the sensitivity of this test is almost 62% and specificity is 33%. However, it has been listed in a guidelines of prognostic evaluation of NPH. This is classical Ivan index which you can calculate. Colossal angle will be more than 40. That is also one thing in favor in neuroradiology. So MRI becomes very important. CSF flow studies will be also important, which will suggest that there is increased flow from ventricle. So this is typical MRI study which shows you a turbulent CSF flow may be seen at the aqueduct, which will be more in favor of NPH. So MRI flow void will be positive signals, and that will be in favor of at the level of abnormal aqueduct. So MRI flow void, abnormal flow, fourth ventricle you will see. We already mentioned regarding external lumbar drainage. 300 ml of drain over a period of 5 days. Sensitivity may be increased, but during this particular period, you should hospitalize the person. There is another test which is called CSF infusion test. One drain is used for continuous pressure monitoring, while other drain is used continuously to infuse solution into CSF space. And you look for the results, that is impedance of the flow offered by the CSF absorption can be studied. by this particular formula. And if aqueductal CSF flow, if you study, that will give you almost no diagnostic use. Isotopic cysternography is also of almost no use nowadays. These are all the different type of studies which are being done: CSF, OP, radionucleotide cysternography, intracranial pressure monitoring, CSF tap test. This is of some value. Then ELD test, CSF, what we call as infusion testing, aqueductal CSF flow velocity, etc. you can do. As far as the differential diagnosis is concerned, you should differentiate this from depression, subcortical arteriosclerotic encephalopathy, multi-infarct encephalopathy, chronic alcoholism, B12, folic acid deficiency, electrolyte imbalance, cervical stenosis, peripheral neuropathy, etc. All this will give rise to cognitive impairment. Main important is you have to differentiate from Alzheimer and Parkinsonism. As far as Parkinsonism is concerned, it is very easy. A levodopa therapy will show you a good improvement in Parkinson disease. So that will be in favor of what we call as Parkinson disease. And in Alzheimer, you will see more amount of cortical atrophy. So that will be very, very helpful. So you will have to differentiate from all these groups. As far as management is concerned, ideally there is no specific treatment which is being described. Levodopa trial should be done to rule out Parkinson disease. There is no specific drug which works in NPH. Mainly surgical treatment is there. In surgical treatment, shunt surgery and CSF tap. And this is a flow chart which tells you that if a person comes with the gait disturbances, dementia and urinary incontinence, you should go for a CT MRI, have a Iman index to find out ventriculomegaly. You can directly go for a CSF tap test. If you do a CSF tap test and if intracranial pressure is more than 18, probably there is a secondary NPH. And if it is secondary NPH, you can go for a shunt directly. If the intracranial pressure is less than 18, you can go for extended tap test or CT cysternography, overnight intracranial pressure monitoring. And if it is in favor, you can go for a shunt. If it is negative, then you can have a follow-up studies. Most common shunt which are being advised is VP shunt or VA shunt. LP shunt is usually not commonly being advised. Even ventriculopleural shunt are not commonly being advised. Most of the patient improves with a shunt. Gait improves more than incontinence, more than cognitive function. So cognitive function, minimum improvement, best improvement is in a gait, second improvement is in incontinence. NPH can also develop Alzheimer, or you should differentiate from other dementia, because in NPH it is partly reversible, but in Alzheimer and other dementia it may not be reversible. But there are good number of other dementia we already mentioned before, like hypothyroidism, B12 deficiency, etc. You should go for reversible conditions. There is another shunt which is being done. It is called Torquil shunt, where From a borehole, you connect it to what we call as cervical area, and that will drain directly into the cisterna, and this is a very common shunt which can be done where you are not able to do VA shunt or VP shunt or even LP shunt. The most important part is while doing a shunt, you have to keep it in mind. Person can have a complications like intracerebral hematoma, intraventricular hematoma, infections, shunt occlusions, or person can develop subdural hygroma, hematomas, or slit ventricles. These are some of the common complications. You should keep it in mind, and they are quite common. There are newer advances where shunt are done with a adjustable shunt valve, which you can adjust the opening pressure. There are gravity controlled valves also being utilized, and that will help you in different postures. There is another procedure which can be done is endoscopic third ventriculostomy, which is an alternative to the shunt replacement, and particularly it is very useful if there is an obstructive hydrocephalus. As far as complication is concerned, complications of shunts are more common. You can have a neurological deficits. Ataxia can give rise to fall and fractures. And secondary to shunt, you can have infections, you can have hematomas, hygromas, etc. So I end my lecture here. I hope this will be very helpful, because you can see sometime in your family itself, and once in a while you will see in your everyday practice. It is a common condition because NPH is common. It is not uncommon. But we underdiagnosed, or good number of time we misdiagnosed. They are misdiagnosed as Alzheimer, they are misdiagnosed as Parkinson's, etc. So I hope this lecture will be very helpful. If you like this lecture, please do subscribe and press like button. This is mainly for educative purpose. I thank you all for taking out time. I know that your time is valuable, and I appreciate you for spending some of the time with me. See you in next lecture.